Chapter 4. The Morality Trap. The morality trap is the belief that you must obey a moral code created by someone else. This trap is a variation of the identity trap, in that it leads you to try to be something other than yourself. It's an easy trap to get caught in, and an easy way to lose your freedom. Morality is a powerful word. Perhaps even more powerful is the word immoral. In an attempt to avoid being labeled immoral, many people allow themselves to be manipulated by others. What is morality? At the same time, the concept of morality is very vague. What is it? Where does it come from? What purpose does it serve? How is it determined? My dictionary defines morality as moral quality or character, rightness or wrongness, as of an action. Well then, let's refer to the definition of moral, which is related to serving, to teach, or in accordance with the principles of right and wrong. Now we're getting somewhere. All we need is a definition of right, and I suppose you can guess what that is. In accordance with justice, law, morality. Unfortunately, this definitional merry-go-round is typical understanding of morality. You should do something because it's right, but by what standard? It seems to me that there are three different kinds of morality. I call them personal, universal, and absolute. By looking at each of them, I think we can get a clear idea of what morality is and how it can be useful in helping you to achieve your freedom. Personal morality. We have seen that you act in ways you hope will bring the best consequences to you, and the best consequences are those that bring you happiness. You always have to consider the consequences of your actions. They are the point of anything you do. However, any act will undoubtedly cause many consequences. You may see that a particular action will produce a consequence you want, but you might also be aware that it could produce other consequences you don't want. For example, suppose you say, "All I want is $1 million. Probably the quickest way of getting it would be to buy a gun and rob the largest bank in town. If getting $1 million were all that mattered to you, that would be an obvious choice. But the $1 million isn't all you want. There are other considerations, such as you want to keep the money longer than just until you're arrested. You want to spend the money on things you like, not on hiding from the FBI. You want to enjoy the things the money can buy, none of which is possible in jail. It's unrealistic then to say, all I want is $1 million. The money is a means to other ends, and it has to be obtained in a way that won't interfere with those ends. Otherwise, you might do something such as robbing a bank that would make it impossible to achieve what you really want. The original statement would be closer to the truth if it were phrased, what I want is enough money to buy the things I want and be free to enjoy those things and to have the respect of people I like, and without obtaining the money in a way that will interfere with other values that are more important to me. Since you're always seeking numerous different goals, you try to foresee the ways in which something immediately desirable might get in the way of other things that are more desirable in the long run. You try to consider more than just what's immediately in front of you. You're placing things in a broader context. Obviously, you can't expect to foresee all the consequences of a given act, but you can try to see all the significant ones. In some cases, such as the bank robbing example, there are obvious consequences that immediately rule out a proposed course of action. In other cases, more subtle possibilities will be recognized after a few minutes' thought. But there will also be cases in which you won't be aware of the specific consequences until after you've acted and begun to experience them. Code of conduct. Because you can't foresee all the specific consequences of what you do, there's a need to have some generalized rules available that can help keep you out of situations that could be troublesome. Those rules can be valuable if they do two things. 1, steer you away from potential disasters, and 2, remind you of the things you must do to satisfy your most important long-term desires. The basic question is, how can I get something I want without hurting my chances for other things that are more important to me? It is this generalized long-term attitude that underlies an individual's basic code of conduct. And when we speak of morality, I can't think of any other sensible reason to be concerned about the subject. Its purpose is to keep you aimed in the direction you most want to go. Personal morality is an attempt to consider all the relevant consequences of your actions. Relevant means those consequences that will affect you. How your actions affect others is only important insofar as that, in turn, affects you. A personal morality is basic to your overall view of how you will find happiness. It is so important that a later chapter will be devoted entirely to questions that can help you form such a morality yourself. And it's important that you form it yourself. No one else, including me, is qualified to tell you how to live. A realistic morality has to consider many personal factors. Your emotional nature, abilities, strengths, weaknesses, and most important, your goals. Your code of conduct has to be consistent with your goals so that you don't do anything that would make these goals unattainable. A code devised by someone else will necessarily be based upon the goals he believes possible and desirable. To be useful, a morality shouldn't include rules for every possible situation. It shouldn't be concerned with minor questions involving only immediate consequences. It's devised to prevent big problems for you and to keep you aimed towards the goals that mean the most to you. Moral questions are concerned only with matters that involve large consequences. There's a difference, for instance, between investing $3 in a movie that might prove to be a dud and investing your life savings in a risky business venture. There's also a difference between tasting a different food that's commonly eaten, such as snails, and sampling toadstools in the forest. The first might cause a stomach ache. The second could poison you. A useful morality will prevent you from doing things that might take years to correct, while keeping you aimed in the direction of the things that are most important to you. And since such matters are an outgrowth of your own personal values, it's obvious that no one else can create your morality for you. A personal morality is the attempt to consider all the relevant consequences of your actions. This is only one of three common types of morality. Universal morality. The second type is a morality that is meant to apply to everyone in the world. A universal morality is one that's supposed to bring happiness to anyone who uses it. When you're exposed to the ideas of someone who has apparently done well with his own life, it's easy to conclude that he has all the final answers. His reasoning makes sense to you. He has results to show for his ideas. What further proof could you need to demonstrate that he knows how to live? He probably does know how to live. His life. It would be foolish not to consider the ideas such a person offers, but it would also be foolish to expect that, as intelligent as he may be, he could have answers that apply to every life in the world. His ideas have worked for him because he's been wise enough to develop ideas that are consistent with his own nature. He hasn't tried to live by the standards created by others. He has found his own, and that's vitally important. You must do the same thing if you want your code of conduct to work that well for you. Your rules have to consider everything that's unique about you, your emotions, your aptitudes, your weak points, your hopes and fears. When you try to live by someone else's rules, you can get yourself into lots and lots of trouble. For example, you can be told that a certain type of action will lead to a certain emotion, and you can suffer a lot of guilt and frustration trying to make your emotions conform to your expectations. Or you can spend your life living in a way that doesn't evoke happiness from your unique nature. And along the way, you might be encouraged to discard the very things that could have led to genuine happiness for you. Or you can create problems with others by being sure that they too should act by the same code. I have met dozens of people who knew they were right about what they were doing and could cite the authority who told them so, but not one of them seemed to be genuinely comfortable in the lifestyle he had assumed. The easiest time to fall into the trap is when you're exposed to someone whose ideas do make a lot of sense. If what he says is logical to you, more logical than what you've heard before, the temptation can be very great to adopt all his ways. Someone like that should be considered very seriously but not accepted in toto. A universal morality is a code of conduct that is presumed to bring happiness to anyone who uses it. I don't believe there can be such a thing. The differences between individuals are far too great to allow for anything but the most general kinds of rules. Absolute morality. There's a third kind of morality. The first two are attempts to help you achieve happiness. One self-directed, the other coming from someone else. The third type is the opposite of this. An absolute morality is a set of rules to which an individual is expected to surrender his own happiness. There are two main characteristics of an absolute morality. One, it presumably comes from an authority outside the individual. It comes from someone or somewhere more important than the individual himself. Two, it proposes that the individual should be moral, regardless of the consequences to himself. In other words, doing what is right is more important than one's own happiness. These two characteristics intertwine, so we will consider them together. Absolute morality is the most common type of morality, and it can be pretty intimidating. You can be made to appear selfish, whim-worshipping, egotistical, hedonistic, or ruthless if you merely assert that your own happiness is the most important thing in your life. But what could be more important than your happiness? It is said that an authoritarian moral code is necessary to protect society. But who is society? Isn't it just a large group of people, all of whom have differing ideas concerning how one should live? And if an individual is required to give up his own happiness for society, of what value is society to him? It is also suggested that God commanded that we live by certain rules. But who can be sure he knows exactly when and how and what God said and what he meant? And even if that could be established once and for all, what will be the consequences to the individual if he acted otherwise? How do we know? And if the code did come from God, it still had to be handled by human beings on its way to you. Whatever the absolute morality may be, you're relying upon someone else to vouch for its authority. Suppose you use a holy book as your guide. I haven't yet seen one that doesn't have some apparent contradictions regarding conduct in it. Those contradictions may disappear with the proper interpretation. But who provides the interpretation? You will do it yourself, or you will select someone to provide it for you. In either case, you have become the authority by making the choice. There is no way someone else can become your authority. The decision will be yours in choosing the morality you live by, even if you choose to cite someone else you have chosen as the authority for your acts. And there is no way you can ignore the consequences to yourself. A human being naturally acts in terms of consequences. What happens, however, is that other people introduce consequences that they hope will influence you. They say that your immoral acts will prevent you from going to heaven, or cause other people to disapprove of you, or destroy society and cause chaos, and it will be all your fault. Sorry. Once again, however, it will be you deciding for yourself whether any of these consequences will result and whether any of them are important to you. The absolute morality fails on its two important characteristics. Even if you choose to believe there is a higher authority, you are the authority who chooses what it is and what it is telling you to do. And since you will always be considering consequences, even if you try to fix it so that you aren't, it's important to deliberately recognize the consequences and decide which ones are important to you. Morality. No matter how we approach the subject, we always wind up at the same place. No one can decide for you what is moral. So no matter what it may be, you are living by a personal morality. The question is whether or not you are acting deliberately to make it the morality that will bring you the kind of life you want for yourself. I'm not suggesting that there is no right and wrong. There most assuredly is. Right is what will bring you happiness, and wrong is what will cause you unhappiness. The same definitions apply to the words good and bad. And since there are no simple answers that can tell you what will bring you long-term happiness, what is right isn't necessarily the temptation in front of you at a given moment. A personal morality is vital because it can keep you aimed in the direction most important to you in the long term. You can't successfully devise such a morality until you know who you are and what you want. And since no one else can answer those questions, no one else is qualified to tell you how to get what you want. The trap. I realize that to some people, the concept of a personal, self-determined morality is revolutionary, possibly even appalling. It is contrary to the absolute moralities most people grew up with, and in addition to other decisions, you will have to decide if what I've said has made sense to you. Whether or not you agree with me isn't as important to you as knowing why you believe as you do, and knowing what consequences your beliefs will produce. The morality trap is the belief that you must obey a moral code created by someone else. If you're acting in ways you hope will satisfy someone else's concept of what is moral, chances are you're using an ill-suited code of conduct, one that won't lead you to what you want and that may trap you in commitments and complications that will only cause you unhappiness. So in terms of the trap, what you do isn't as significant as why you do it. You're in the trap if you hand a very important dollar to a beggar because it's wrong to be selfish. Or if you continue to deal respectfully with someone who's made trouble for you because to forgive is divine. You're in the trap if you allow yourself to be drafted because you have a duty to serve your country. Or if you prohibit drinking in your home because it would weaken the moral fiber of society. Or if you send your children to Sunday school even though you aren't religious because you should give them a moral upbringing. You might have very good reasons for any one of these actions. But if you do them only in obedience to moral cliches, you're in the morality trap. Pressure from others. There are plenty of people who will be delighted to tell you how to live. You will hear the words moral and immoral often enough. A person who tells you to act morally might have any one of a number of reasons. He may really believe that your moral conduct is essential to the future of the world, or he may believe that he is God's appointed policeman. Or he may be using morality as a weapon to pressure you to do what's best for him. Or he may just have nothing better to do with his time. Whatever his reason, remember that it is his reason. Too often, morality is used merely as a tool by which one person hopes to manipulate another. Your reasons for how you live will necessarily be your own. No one knows you as you can know yourself. And only from that self-understanding can you hope to create a code of conduct that will bring you the freedom and happiness you crave. A useful morality should recognize that other people think differently from the way you do, and it should provide ways of handling those differences without bowing to the dictates of others. There are ways of eliminating the pressure without giving in, as we'll discuss in Chapter 17. Your morality. You are responsible for what happens to you, even if someone else offers to accept that responsibility, because you are the one who will experience the consequences of your acts. You are the one who decides what is right and what is wrong, no matter what meaning others may attach to those words. You don't have to obey blindly to the dictates that you grew up with or that you hear around you now. Everything can be challenged. Should be challenged, examined to determine its relevance to you and what you want. As you examine the teachings of others, you may find that some of it is very appropriate to you, but much of it may be meaningless or even harmful. The important thing is to carefully reappraise any moral precept that has been guiding your actions. As you examine each of the rules you've been living by, ask yourself, is this rule something that others have devised on behalf of society to restrain individuals, or have I devised it in order to make my life better for myself? Am I acting by an old, just happens to be their morality, or is it something I have personally determined from the knowledge of who I am and what I want? Are the rewards and punishments attached to the rules vague and intangible, or do the rules point to specific happiness I can achieve or unhappiness I can avoid? Is it a morality I've accepted because someone undoubtedly knows the reason for it? Or is it one I've created because I know the reason for it? Is it a morality that's currently in style and accepted by all those around me? Or is it a morality specifically tailored to my style? Is it a morality that's aimed at me and against my self-interest? Or is it a morality that's for me and comes from me? All the answers must come from you, not from a book or a lecture or a sermon. To assume that someone once wrote down the final answers for your morality is to assume that the writer stopped growing the day he wrote the code. Don't treat him unfairly by thinking that he couldn't have discovered more and increased his own understanding after he had written the code. And don't forget that what he wrote was based upon what he saw and what he wanted from life. No matter how you approach the matter, you are the sovereign authority who makes the final decisions. The more you realize that, the more your decisions will fit realistically with your own life. Personal morality is an attempt to consider all the relevant consequences of your acts. If you think out your morality for yourself, it should open up a better life that will be free from the bad consequences that complicate matters. And it should lead you more directly to those things that bring you happiness. Along the way, you should be able to act more freely. For once you've looked ahead to recognize potentially troublesome situations, you're free to act more impulsively in pleasant circumstances, knowing there's no danger that bad problems will ensue. When you decide to take matters into your own hands, someone may ask you, "Who do you think you are? Who are you to decide for yourself in the face of society and centuries of moral teachings?" The answer is simple. You are you, the person who will live with the consequences of what you do. No one else can be responsible, because no one else will experience the consequences of your actions as you will. If you are wrong, you will suffer for it. If you are right, you will find happiness. You will have to be the one to decide. Who are you to know? It's your future at stake. You have to know.